There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain. Well, hello, everybody. Once again, welcome to the Your Mountain podcast. I'm your host, as per the usual, David Wilms, and I've got on either side of me, Nephi Cole.
I'm here, not sick.
I didn't know you were sick before.
No, your kids are sick. I'm wondering if you're like sick. Typhoid Annie.
I washed my hands this morning, and then I handled them all day, and I haven't washed them since.
Oh, thanks for the pat on the back, big guy.
You betcha. Mike McGrady.
Hey.
How are you doing?
Never been better.
I like that pattern is continuing. I wish I could say the same. But again, I have two kids, and now you're about to be worse because I'm giving you a pat on the back.
Yeah, right.
And we are joined today. We got a couple of great guests today. If you remember last week, we talked about the Farm Bill, and we talked just a 30,000-foot overview. What's in it? What's it about? The conservation programs in the Farm Bill. We talked about some of the nutrition programs in the Farm Bill. We didn't touch on a ton of it, but we gave you an overview. And one thing we mentioned last week is that we were going to have a couple of folks on so we could talk about the implementation of the Farm Bill. How does it actually work? Who benefits from it? How do programs work on the ground? And then, get a perspective from folks that are leading the charge on seeing the Farm Bill move in Congress, the ones that are trying to help facilitate its passage. Get some perspective from them on where we're going, what we're doing. Does it have a chance of passing? What are the hang-ups?
Why it's important.
Why is it important? Why should, as a hunter and angler, as a sports person, why should you care about it? We want to address all of those topics today and probably a lot more. And so we're pretty excited today. We've got Alex Maggos. And if I butcher your names, make sure you correct me. But Alex Maggos with the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. You are the Agriculture Center Director, is that correct?
That's right.
And you're based in Washington, D.C. or somewhere else?
I'm based in Washington.
So tell us, really quick, actually, before I have you get into it, let me also introduce our other guest here. Don't want to leave him just sitting here listening to everybody else. Zane Zaubi, did I get that right?
You got it. Yep, spot on.
Awesome. So you are a farmer in Illinois.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so much a farmer, but
okay.
We started a little corporation that's Horizon Land Development, which is buying up farms and improving them and improving the habitat and stuff like that, as well as a real estate developer.
Okay. Well, I want to come back to that too. I think that I want to learn more about what it is you're doing. Really quickly with Alex, tell us about the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. What are you?
That's a good question. We get that a lot. TRCP is a really unique organization. We're a conservation nonprofit, but we're unique in that rather than having a membership base of members that we work with and activate on grassroots type issues, we're kind of a coalition of all of the different grassroots organizations you can think of, from Pheasants Forever, backcountry hunters and anglers, bone and tarpon fish, pretty much everyone you can think of. And the reason we're pretty cool in that respect is that we bring them all together, do our best to get them to agree on a certain set of issues. I work on the Farm Bill, so we have a coalition that comes to a consensus on what we want in the Farm Bill. And then we go and advocate on behalf of that coalition. And that's really effective because we can be kind of a fractured group out here in Washington where you have 100 different conservation organizations with 100 different priorities. Well, unless you're kind of unified, none of those priorities are going to get signed into law. So we work really hard to bring everybody together in the same room, agree on maybe not 100 priorities, but 10. And then when we're unified like that, we can actually get those signed into law. We've done that really well so far in the Farm Bill.
Well, have you? I mean, it's this. I just joke. I'm joking a little bit, but didn't the Farm Bill expire September 30th?
Sure. So we didn't get it on time like we wanted, but I think we've got I think we're up to close to a dozen priorities that our group has asked for tucked into either the House or the Senate bill, some both.
And so just describe that really quick. So you have a House and a Senate version of the bill, just for listeners out there that may not really understand the legislative process, how this works.
Yeah. So to get a law, you start with a committee draft. So each committee, being the House and Senate Agriculture committees, will produce a draft law. If those committee members like that draft, they'll pass it out of committee and on to the larger body. So out of the House committee, we saw a bill pass out of committee and go to the House floor, which there's 435 members of the House of Representatives. Of that 435, you need a majority to pass the bill out of the House of Representatives. So the House Farm Bill passed with 213 votes. Interestingly, that was all Republican votes, 0 Democrats. So it was a very narrow margin and also a pretty partisan result.
Do you know why that was?
It was largely because of the nutrition reforms they wanted. They wanted to strengthen the work requirements that it takes to qualify for food stamps, essentially.
And when you say you're talking the Republicans in this instance wanted to strengthen the work requirements under the nutrition plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So using the Republican lingo, they wanted to strengthen the work requirements. Their colleagues across the aisle didn't think that was too fair to the folks that rely on those supports. So they didn't vote for the bill. That was the big hang up in the House bill.
And when we're talking about those nutrition those provisions of the bill, nutrition related, we're really talking, most people will probably recognize it as the food stamp program, right? That's how people recognize that, or in the common vernacular, how people would recognize it.
The SNAP.
SNAP, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It used to be food stamps, now it's SNAP, but that's what we're talking about, is helping people eat that need some help.
Right.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that, when you talk about the Farm Bill, if you haven't gone back and listened to the short episode, go listen to it, everybody. When we talk about the Farm Bill, remember the conservation title. When you look at the size of the SNAP portion of the Farm Bill, it's big, and so there's a lot of weight over there in terms of the impact on people and just in terms of population, also in terms of the dollars associated with it. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's called the Farm Bill, but nutrition, what we're talking about, is about 80%. Conservation pales in comparison, it's 5%. But the actual dollars is a different story. I mean, that 5% for conservation, that's $5 billion, which is crazy. For the same time frame of the 2014 Farm Bill, which was from January 2014 till September of this year, that was $5 billion. During that same time frame, LWCF was just around 2 million. So the Farm Bill, in terms of dollars spent, is 2.5 times the amount of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which a lot more people are familiar with. But in terms of dollars, the Farm Bill means a lot more for conservation.
Yeah, but I think the reason that people don't necessarily recognize that, excuse me, is to a large degree, Farm Bill, to a large degree, impacts private lands. And so, right now there's a real awakening about, public lands hunting and opportunities on public lands and kind of our big spaces out west and things like that. And a lot of times I think that we forget about, where does a guy in Illinois hunt? Where does a guy who is on the, in the South and the East Coast, those non-public lands hunters, well, there's a whole lot of conservation and a whole lot of hunting going on private lands, and that's where that conservation piece of the Farm Bill, a big part of it's expressed, is on those private lands.
Yeah, Zane, let me put you on the spot really quick. Do you know how much public land there is in Illinois?
Yeah, so me and Alex were talking the other day, and I don't know the exact acreage, but we talked the other day. It's like the upwards of 90% of Illinois is privatized. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of percentage, you're working on a very minute number of acres relative to what's available.
Right. And I think states like Kansas, I think their number is something over 95% private. And so we think out here in the West, we think, a state like Wyoming, think, boy, we have an awful lot of private. 50% of our state is private.
Yeah.
And then you forget that as you move east, much of the access and much of the habitat, virtually all of it, is provided and created by private landowners.
I'm going to jump the gun a ton right here, hoping that we're going to come back to it, and then we can move past it. So I'll just put this down as a note. TRCP is doing some great stuff right now in terms of talking about access to public lands that are landlocked out here in the West. But this is just a great reminder of how important those access programs are and opportunities to work with private landowners on access, and how important those are in the rest of the country, and how, if we want more people hunting and fishing, it can't just be about the piece that is the public lands. It has to be a collaborative effort of, private lands and public lands working in conjunction if we're going to get people out into the field. So that's just a note.
Well, it's so one thing that a lot of sportsmen probably don't realize is that under the Farm Bill, there's actually funding for access.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah,
you guys
sure.
want to touch on that?
Alex, you want to touch on that, or you want me to run with it, or you tell me, man?
Yeah, how about I'll talk about how it's in the Farm Bill and then hand it over to you.
Sure.
So yeah, access for hunters is certainly our number one mission here at TRCP, and that's the coolest part about the Farm Bill. There's a program, it's actually kind of a grant called the Voluntary Public Access Program. And states can apply for the funding available through that grant, and then should they win it, then they get to take $1 million or a couple $1 million to design a walk-in access program or some form of access program. Happy to talk about how that works in a couple different states, but the essential core is that it has to open up private lands to public access, which is really cool in the states we were talking about, like Illinois, Kansas, some of those more corn belt states you might think of that are largely privately owned, where access is hard to come by. Opening up access on private lands is really cool. Not only is it not overrun like some of the small chunks of public land you might find in a state like Illinois, it's also well managed, the habitat's well groomed, and it's extremely productive for folks that are either on their first hunt or, they've been hunting their whole lives and they just need a place to go that's close to home. And Zane, we've been working with Zane now for a couple months because Zane, he participates a couple of his acres in the Voluntary Public Access Program back in Illinois. And Zane, you've been pretty insightful on what it looks like from the landowner's perspective, as well as how successful folks have been out on your place.
Yeah, the whole thing stemmed from I go out to Colorado every September elk hunting, and you see the opportunity that out-of-state guys like myself get to hunt some of this public stuff out there. And it's mind-boggling to me being from Central Illinois. You just don't have that any ground that a deer could potentially be killed on in Illinois. It's become a business. I mean, it's every acre is almost totally leased up, whether that be in-state or out-of-state guys. So the opportunity for somebody to not hunt public stuff, it didn't exist prior to this program that Alex is talking about. The state parks, what little that we have, it can be so overrun that it's really tough for kids and adults the same to kind of get their feet wet into hunting some of this stuff, because it's people climbing over each other because of the limited acreage.
So one of the big things from the hunting community you hear about a lot these days, you hear about the 3 R's, right? Recruit, retain, and reactivate, because we have declining numbers around the country. Some states are exceptions, but we have declining numbers of hunters and anglers across the country, which obviously impacts a couple of things. One, the amount of money that's coming in for conservation through license sales, through Pittman-Robertson funds, but it also reduces the number of advocates you have for on the Hill for programs like the Farm Bill to give another group that's pushing for passage of the Farm Bill. It seems to me that programs like this are essential for trying to build that new generation of hunters, trying to recruit and retain and reactivate hunters, because access, especially when you get outside of the West, where access isn't a limiting factor in the West, but you just said it, access is maybe the limiting factor for some folks in the Corn Belt states. So a program like this to help create access seems critical. What made you decide to get involved with that program?
It actually all came. I had a friend that was part of the original team in Illinois that got the grant, was in charge of developing basically the whole program. And, the whole concept was kind of wild at first that, you're just going to open up the gates, so to speak, on the farm and open it up to the public. I won't say that I was totally on board right away, just because, it's all in how it's organized and how it's managed. And when we got to talking about it, he started talking about, some of the preference to first-time hunters and to youth and stuff like that, to create opportunity, like what we were talking about, that just can be the access being a real limiting factor, to create some opportunity to get some new people into the sport. I mean, that was, at that point, my ears were open and I was all in on the conversation. And then it became, some obvious concerns like liability coverage and how organized is this going to be, to where you're not going to have people fighting over each other on your farm, just as they may be doing on some of the public stuff. Because, I didn't want to get involved with anything like that, but that hasn't been the case at all up until this point. I mean, it's very well organized. Illinois has done a really good job of developing a system that starts with basically going out there with the landowner, whether that be me or the next guy, and marking property lines and marking where the landowner wishes for the people that may be using that particular parcel to park, and how they should walk into a given area, so that they're not rutting up a farm, or they're not walking through a core area to get to where they're going. Everybody's on the same page from the word go, it seems like.
I think that's awesome. It's something that we've seen here in Wyoming, and that we need more of, nationally. I think you hit it right on the head when you said that access is a limiting factor. And that's not just for hunting. It's for any type of the shooting sports. You see that the challenge for people, the reason people do get into it or don't get into it, it's limit of opportunity, and that's across the board. One of the things that you mentioned that I really liked, you talked about controlling people and the management of hunters as they come in. This is a pitch I want to make to landowners. So I had a great discussion the other day with an individual here who's very active with conservation districts in the state of Wyoming. And we were talking specifically, once again, about the great effort that TRCP, I'm sure we're going to talk about it at some point here, is doing to, along with Onyx Maps, to make people aware of the challenges of accessing some public lands. And this influential rancher conservation district person was like, you know what? This is something that we need to get involved of, because we can't afford not to. We can't afford to have the agricultural community and the hunting community be at odds with one another, because we just have too much in common. We work too much together. There are too many opportunities that we have together. And I wanted to get your perspective on that, about how the agricultural community and the hunting community, first of all, what's the confluence in terms of, values, in terms of types of people, and then what are the opportunities that we have where we can maybe build something bigger than what we have now, maybe broaden our horizons, and what can we do that's different than what we've done in the past to really open access up?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting conversation, because it could be something as simple as like you said, with some of the mapping stuff like Onyx Map and stuff like that. Now you have the ability to, you can see a property line, you can see a border, and have a point of contact to maybe reach out to that person next door to be able to recover an animal, or to be able to gain further access onto, adjoining tracts and stuff like that. I mean, it's, you're not only talking about building relationships with the landowners around and the farm community around, but you're talking about everybody getting on the same game plan as far as a wildlife management practice too.
Yeah,
I think it takes. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Alex.
I think it takes a little bit of a conversation too. I think there's a somewhat complete misunderstanding sometimes between landowners and hunters that we did want different things. It turns out, as it relates to agriculture, a lot of the stuff we want, like cover crops or any of the practices that help reduce runoff, those not only help a farmer's bottom line, but they also help their longevity as it relates to not being heavily regulated or anything like that. Out in Iowa, they're already starting to test the waters of punishing farmers for runoff that may or may not be theirs. We want to reduce runoff because it improves fishing waters all the way from the Mississippi down to the Gulf. So that by providing these programs that help reduce runoff, it not only benefits us and the things we like to do on the weekends, right? But it helps farmers too.
Yeah, the Farm Bill is really the home of voluntary incentive-based conservation. And for people who don't know what that means, it means there's two ways you can look at that in general society right now is looking at conservation. One of them is a punitive way. So that idea that, we're going to find who's responsible for the things that we don't like, and we're going to, gosh dang it, we're going to find that guy, and we're going to turn the screws on that guy. Now, the problem with that when you're dealing with conservation issues, as you touched on, is that many of these issues are what we call non-point issues. These are diffuse issues. And so when you're talking about pollution in a stream, typically, you're not talking about a point source, something that's, you're going to find it right on the end of a pipe. You're talking about miles and miles and miles of streams. And you're talking about many diffuse contributors and inputs into that stream. And so trying to find somebody and point the finger at somebody and say, hey, this is your fault, that's a really challenging issue. It really doesn't work. And so what voluntary incentive-based conservation means is it means you get everybody to the table who might have a dog in the fight, and you talk about it, and you find ways to provide a carrot instead of a stick to get people to put conservation on the ground. And it's effective.
No, that's. I think I might have misunderstood you a little bit, but no, that's one of the main things that we do. I kind of when we first did the introductions, I mentioned that we started a little LLC that's what it's basically. The whole thing is derivative of. We're taking some of this tillable acreage that either potentially has chemical runoff into some of our water systems, or that are, I joke that they're farms that are ready to fall off the face of the earth because of how they've been farmed for so long. And it's taken that stuff back into, wildlife habitat, to stuff that should have never been farmed. But, it's the old push every hedgerow out, push everything out and try to farm every acre. I think, it's pretty important to take some of that stuff back to wildlife habitat, and for the sake of erosion control and everything like that, because we're in a day and age where so much of that stuff is just getting cleared and pushed over, that we're trying to actively buy up ground in different counties of central Illinois and get some of those larger parcels bought and put back into good habitat for all the wildlife's sake.
Yeah. So, what kind of specific projects are you doing on this property you've got? Yeah, and are you targeting certain areas, like particular watersheds or locations?
A lot of it has been watershed, just because of where we're located in central Illinois. Here, I'm in Springfield, Illinois, so we're not too far from the Illinois. We have the Sangamon, a number of different river systems that kind of all come together here, relatively close, and it's taken some of that bottom ground dirt and taking some of those areas that have, constantly been a wet spot for the farmers, and potentially building, say a wetland there, and then taking some of the high ground and putting Big Blue and Little Blue and some of your different grass blends and stuff like that to get some of the bird nesting back. And then, it all depends on how the farm lays out. But then we may have the opportunity to put some funnels of good oaks and hickory and trees like that to try to create some more deer habitat as well. So I would say it's more river based, because that's where we're located here. But we have found some pieces down further south that are some seriously highly erodible counties, like put me on the spot.
One of those counties.
Macoupin County in particular is one that just has seriously rolling hills in Pike County alike.
Yep.
That some of the stuff down there, you wouldn't even believe some of the stuff that they've farmed for decades and decades. And it's taking some of that stuff and trying to get it back to get the ground stabilized to where everything's not getting totally uprooted. And the wildlife habitat is a phenomenal bonus to that.
So you mentioned that you are in real estate development. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that there's an economic component to this to being able to make it work. And so how do you do that? And then what types of partnerships are necessary, be it public, private, whatever, to be able to make that conservation stick and get it on the ground?
Sure. I mean, it's not obviously it has to make some kind of financial sense to do stuff like this. But it is relative to the income that would have been produced by traditional row crop. But it's driven by our passion for the wildlife. It's driven by our passion for the habitat regeneration. But the partnerships are key to get it done too, because of the extreme expenses that are required to implement some of this stuff. So it's partnerships with in Illinois, it's called IRAP, but like what Alex was talking about, it's the voluntary access. They do a really good job of helping us out in terms of cost share, as well as management practices in trying to get some of this stuff done. I mean, we're all on the same page. We're all avid outdoorsmen to where they will actually help us with some of the cost shares in the implementation, whether that be a grass planting or a tree planting or a wetland build, as well as they have a crew that will come in and help us with some of the removal of invasive species, or whether that be having a crew come back in and do particular interseedings and stuff like that to get that habitat off the ground.
So as I'm listening to this, this all sounds amazing, and it's a business, right? So you're in this, part of it is you got to be making money, and I'm trying to figure out how you make money in conservation. And so I guess right off the bat, I'm wondering, are you doing some kind of mitigation banking or like wetland banking, or is it something completely different?
No, this is much more of a hobby than it is anything else. This is not a real lucrative. This is driven by my passion for deer hunting and quail hunting and pheasant.
That's awesome.
How do we get more people like you out there?
so
it's getting out of trying to buy and sell stuff by the square foot and looking at stuff by the acre to where we can a place to go play, a grown man's paradise, playground, whatever you want to call it.
So there is huge opportunity in this, and let me go back and touch a little bit on how, and like with a large, an example of a ranch that we're all probably familiar with in, I don't know if you want me using it in Utah. So there was an organization there that had a big old ranch. It's Deseret Ranch, right? And so this ranch ran into an issue where, a management issue. And at one point, they came to the decision that they had to incorporate a couple things into their management in order to make them profitable. So somebody came and said, look, if this property is not profitable, owned by a large corporation, they said, we're getting rid of it. So if you want to keep your jobs here, you need to make this work. So what did they do? They put conservation on the ground. They started doing they did water improvements. They did improvements to reduce grazing pressure, to try and increase the quality of their forage, increase the quality of their cover, increase the quality of their habitat, increase water sources in order to disperse both livestock and wildlife more evenly around the property. And then what they were able to do is, making those management changes, they were able to make the habitat so much more desirable that they were able to create a draw for those hunters, those fishermen who wanted to come and hunt and fish on that place. And that's what enabled them to be able to monetize to some degree their wildlife record, their outdoor recreation on that place, and allowed them to stay in business. And I think that that's something that a lot of people miss when we start talking about these private landowners, and then there's kind of a little bit of angst about, well, I want to be able to get on everybody's place. I want to be able to go where I want. We forget that these guys some of these decisions that they're making, these are decisions that they're making so they can stay on the landscape and be good stewards there. And if that wasn't the case, if they weren't trying to figure out how to do it better, how to both conservation and management, we might not have those open spaces.
No, that's, don't get me wrong. I grew up in a farm family. My grandpa farmed my entire life. But it's, it was one of those things that if we could find a healthy percentage of the ground that we own and manage, and be able to get a comparable income relative to what would have been in a traditional farming practice, and to be able to create wildlife habitat and a place for me to go hunt and fish and play and share that with generations to come, that was a no-brainer to me. I mean, if you can get somewhere close to where we were in terms of income levels, and have these opportunities and be able to share these opportunities with others, not just in my family, but with the experiences with the access program, it was a no-brainer to me. And that's why I'm here. And that's the whole point, is to share the positive experiences of this recreational access program, that it can be a no-brainer. I mean, it really can, to be able to share those experiences with others.
Let me ask you, without the Farm Bill, would what you're doing be possible?
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah. And so there are other people like you probably in the same boat that depend on the Farm Bill to be able to provide these opportunities, not just to improve habitat and improve riparian areas, but to provide opportunities to people that wouldn't have opportunities otherwise.
No, that's exactly right. And I'm lucky enough that, I get to get out and travel a little bit and hunt a little bit across the states. And you go to some parts in the Midwest and you just look at some of the stuff and you're like, this is what CRP was designed for, and it's not being implemented here. They're going through and these drainage ditches, they're just rebuilding them every 2 years because the washouts are so bad. And I'm sitting there ready to pull my hair out, because it's like, are you aware of what's available? Are you aware of the habitat that could be created with a similar income to what you're going to get off those couple acres of pure washouts that you're going to be rebuilding every couple of years? It's crazy to me.
It's really interesting you bring that up. I used to work for NRCS for a long time, and so it's amazing how many producers haven't walked through that door yet. To me, how many producers haven't gone into that office and just said, hey, tell me about the programs that are available. And a lot of it is it's almost this, there's so much opportunity for us to introduce these different concepts and opportunities to people. I mean, there's just a world of opportunity out there.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, that's one of the farms that we have that we have in Illinois calls it the IREP program, which is the Illinois Recreational Access Program. That's their grant money. That's what they refer to it as. But I've had an experience with somebody that had hunted one of the farms, and he said, what's so great about this piece right here? He said, I hunted it, and it's tillable field, it's tillable field, it's tillable field. And then there's yours. And I don't, for whatever reason, they're on your farm and not these tillable fields with standing beans and standing corns. And I'm going, it's the habitat. It's the bedding area. It's the habitat that was created. That's what you need, a little bit of that breakup in order to create a whitetail haven or a pheasant, quail, whatever it may be. You got to have some of that to break up the thousands of acres of row crop.
Do you accept first-time Illinois hunters, even if they're not first-time hunters?
No, I'm sure we can figure something out, guys.
Yeah. Dave, this man, the cheapest man on earth, this guy does not deserve. Hey. All right, Dave, you do. You deserve it.
Illinois, their access program allows out of state, so go ahead and apply.
Yeah,
right.
apply.
All right.
I like
there you
that.
go.
Dave has a wicked streak of good luck too, though, so I don't want him to apply.
I probably burned it all. So, hey, Alex, I wanted to ask you. So when we're obviously, for Zane, without the Farm Bill, none of the work he's doing would be possible. In the work that you're doing, are you hearing the same thing from folks you talk to? without the Farm Bill, some of these opportunities would be lost?
Yeah. What's the alternative? Most states can't afford the technical expertise that it takes to do this well. They can't afford the cash that it takes to do this well. Without a Farm Bill, I don't know what the incentive is to do good conservation on private lands. And if you don't have that incentive as a landowner and you're trying to make dollars and cents decisions and make payroll for your farm, you're going to farm it. You're not going to go and create habitat or do some other things that don't pay. So I think it's critical to have this bill and have these incentives. And I don't know who else does it. The federal government by far is the most equipped to do it and do it well, especially with all of the science they have to back it up and their history of working with farmers on this stuff.
Well, and the Farm Bill, it's been around forever. I mean, it's been around for since right around the Great Depression. I mean, it's been around a long time.
That was the nexus for it.
Yeah.
We had the Dust Bowl, and we figured out, you know what, maybe we should help some folks farm a little bit easier on the ground. And that's how we got the Farm Bill.
Well, I think the other reason is we want to make sure that we have affordable food for the country. So, if you need to balance that supply-demand issue to make sure that we keep farmers in business, keep lands in production, and keep commodity prices affordable so we can feed our country. And that's part of what the Farm Bill was intended to do as well.
I think anybody who hasn't read it, it's worth going back and reading the Aldo Leopold essay, Conservation Economics. And it's excellent. If you've never read it, go check it out. It's not well known by a lot of people, but it talks a lot about this, about, how do we make these choices and how do we, and really a lot of it does come down to economics. And so, but there's a way for us to make sure that those economics work for conservation too. There's an economic value and it's not punitive to having great places, to having open spaces. And so that's part of the educational opportunity and campaign too, is showing people how, on both sides, from the landowner perspective, it's letting them know about those opportunities and that those opportunities are there in a way that is respectful still of their private property rights, that, allows them to keep doing what they're doing. And then on the public side too, there's an educational piece for those who don't necessarily haven't considered things from the agricultural perspective. There's an opportunity to share with them the amount, the challenge that it is, running a farm in the United States of America and taking care of all those resources, the amount of work and the decision making and the science that goes into doing that the right way. So it's ripe. The opportunity's there.
I mean, speaking on the educational component, Alex, I wanted to ask you this. So each of us here hunts and fishes, and a lot of our listeners are anglers or hunters. Why should they care about the Farm Bill?
It's pretty straightforward. Most of this country is privately owned. The Farm Bill is the only place where you get conservation on private lands. You're simply not going to be able to regulate people to the point where they're doing what you think they should be doing on their lands. But you can incentivize them. That's what the Farm Bill does. 70% is privately owned. 40% of this country is rooted in some form of agriculture. So whether or not you have access to that piece of farmland that is executing good conservation kind of doesn't matter, because whatever's happening on that farm is going to flow down that stream and go outside that property line, or it's going to hop over the fence, or you could have access to it through the Farm Bill, which creates access to hunting or to agriculture lands. I mean, it kind of does it all. And just because you don't have it on public land, I think is kind of irrelevant. It's so much of our country is privately owned. You need that conservation happening there just as much as you do on public land.
Well, so you mentioned early on that, when we were talking about the total makeup of the financial makeup of the Farm Bill, and how the vast majority, 80% of it, was nutrition piece, and a much smaller portion was the conservation piece. Within that conservation piece, there are a whole host of programs, different programs. What are some of the programs within that conservation piece that, from the TRCP perspective, are most important?
Sure. I think we can just kind of go alphabetically, I guess, is probably the best way to do it.
And I should also, sorry to interrupt, I should also say, when you mention the program, tell us a little bit about each program too, so listeners kind of know what the program does.
Sure. And that's what can be tough about a newcomer to the Farm Bill is that it's an alphabet soup of programs that do things you'd never heard about. But let's start at the top. It's Agriculture Conservation Easement Program. That's helps landowners establish and restore wetlands, which is critical for waterfowl habitat. There's the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP. A lot more folks have heard of that one. That goes to replace crops on highly erodible soil, say it's a steep hillside or we've got a lot of water next to it, and replace that with some wildlife habitat of some form.
And that's one where Pheasants Forever has been a big advocate and champion and partner with the CRP program over the years, right?
Exactly. And you know why? It's because the pheasant population is almost directly correlated to the amount of acres enrolled in CRP. That's their habitat. So if you watch CRP acreage increase across the country, so do the pheasant habitat, or so do the pheasants. As soon as that acreage starts shrinking, which we're in a historic low right now, you have pheasant numbers at a historic low.
In fact, they've taken such an active role. I think they have Farm Bill biologists working for Pheasants Forever they're out there trying to create opportunities for landowners to enroll in the CRP program and helping them step through that process and all of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and you see that all over the Farm Bill. So a lot of it is public-private partnerships, which, as we are all taxpayers and so are your listeners, that's a great deal because
it better be
not on the hook for all of it. It's cost share. So whether you're cost sharing with a landowner like Zane to get good habitat in place, so he's not doing it all on his own, and neither is the taxpayer. It's kind of a mutual thing there. Or through Farm Bill biologists that Pheasants Forever provides. That organization helps foot the bill for some really smart folks doing some really smart things with habitat, and then the government or taxpayers match the rest. That's huge. That means nobody's carrying the bill themselves, and we get a lot more for each dollar than we would just doing it on our own.
Yeah.
So what are some of the other programs you were mentioning there?
Right. So another neat one that probably most folks don't know about is conservation compliance. And this is less of a program than it is a law where it protects or it links rather crop insurance to the draining of wetlands. So if you have a wetland, mostly in the prairie pothole region is where we're talking about. The prairie pothole region is North and South Dakota. I think something like 70% of the ducks shot in the United States are born and raised there in the prairie pothole region. If you have a wetland on your property that's determined to be a wetland by the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and you go to drain that wetland to plant it, you lose your crop insurance subsidy. And that works really well because, one, taxpayer support for commodities comes pretty quickly through crop insurance. And that subsidy shouldn't come at the cost of quality habitat or clean water. And that's essentially what you get, what you lose when you drain a wetland. You get a lot more dirt and runoff running down the Mississippi River Basin a lot faster. And you also lose a lot of good duck habitat. So ensuring those wetlands stay in place through conservation compliance and making sure they aren't drained by having the stick at the other end, which is losing your crop insurance subsidy, that's something really important in the Farm Bill.
So for those who don't know from the NRCS perspective, just so everybody knows this is like a real thing. When you go out to those wetlands, speaking as a guy who used to do wetlands work, like they're natural areas and they're like, these aren't things that somebody imagines up. The properties, the soils, the plants, they've been there for hundreds and even thousands of years. And so when they're really unique environments and they're easily identifiable. So this isn't something that somebody just makes up. I mean, they're real and they're there and they've perform a vital function, and hopefully they're going to continue to do that.
Although what I'd learned, I married into a family from North Dakota, and I learned you're not supposed to call them potholes when you're in North Dakota. They're sloughs. There's all sloughs everywhere. It's just sloughs.
Nice. Well, and it's interesting, like on the surface, that might sound like a place where sportsmen and landowners or farmers come at odds. But what we've learned very quickly in this Farm Bill, and the reason this law came about, is because that's a great place where we get along. Soybean farmers really like that program because that makes their soybeans extremely marketable overseas to places like Europe where they're environmentally conscious. So that helps them market their soybeans overseas, and it helps us keep our ducks alive so we can shoot at them later when they come down the flyway.
Yeah, and that's one of the neat things about the Farm Bill is because I think that I always say I think that people in general, people are good, and people try and make the right decisions and they try and do the right thing, and that's just across the board. I believe that about humanity. So when you see somebody and you think that you don't like, some kind of a practice that's on somebody's land, there's probably a reason that the decision's being made. And in a lot of these cases with conservation programs, if there's a better way to do business, if there's a way, and not just a better way to do business, if there's a way to do conservation the right way, a lot of times people just don't know about it. And when you make people aware of it and you create the opportunity for them to do the right thing, people generally do the right thing. And that's the reality of it.
Yeah, and I think the last program, and we kind of touched on it here throughout the podcast, is the Voluntary Public Access Program. And I think it's really important to know for folks that want to hunt in other states that you can do it on private land through this program. So in Colorado, they're creating pheasant habitat with walk-in access. In Georgia, they use it to open up hunting ground for youth, minorities, veterans, disabled folks. They have special plots of land that are privately owned that are now open to the public through this program. In Michigan, a lot of the public land up in Michigan is in the northern end of the state, which a lot of the hunters don't live up there. Through the Voluntary Public Access Program, they've opened up 22,000 acres. Most of it is within 25 minutes of the hunter's home that are using that program. In Wyoming, out there, not only has it opened up 600,000 acres of private land to hunting, it's 44 miles upstream for walk-in fishing as well. So each state does it differently, but it does some really cool stuff just about anywhere you go. And all you have to do is type in walk-in access or Google your state and walk-in access, and you'll come across it. In the coming months, TRCP will release a report similar to what you saw on the Land and Water Conservation Fund that highlights how to tap into these programs across the country and kind of the neat ways they're being used.
That's awesome. I think I wanted to ask you one more question on this access piece, or to make people aware of it. For landowners that don't know, there are a lot of people I know that they lease out certain opportunities on their land. So maybe they lease out, maybe they have a deer lease, maybe they have, an outfitter who comes in. There are opportunities still for access programs that don't affect that. So there are places we have in the state where you may not be able to hunt elk, but you can hunt antelope. You may, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say there's even places where you can hunt elk and hunt. So I think about a place where, where you have an elk season that runs, maybe it's bull only, and the landowner is leasing their place out during the bull season, and that bull tag turns to cow only for a late season hunt. That landowner can enroll that property in the walk-in area program for just that
and
cow
a lot
season.
Of them do.
And a lot do. They enroll for that cow season, but not for the bull season because they might be leasing it to an outfitter or to somebody else during that bull season.
Those are the opportunities that, as the sportsman's community, we really need to take advantage of and talk about how we can do more. So, I think maybe it's a mistake to try and take the whole apple cart in some cases and say we want it all. But I think there are opportunities to work with landowners to get part of what we want, especially if we are conscious of those private property rights. And another great example of that is, we had a situation here in the state where we had a huge piece of public ground that we were going to lose access to. And there was, through a land transfer. But within that, there was an opportunity there where we were to purchase an access easement that would have maintained access to those public lands. And so I think that is an area, and I wonder if you would mind talking about it, that is absolutely ripe for these public-private partnerships and for these discussions where we need third-party organizations like TRCP, or maybe it's the Future of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, or maybe it's TNC, to acquire these easements to get into these places where there is no access that are public.
Yeah, and that can even be done through the Voluntary Public Access Program. The state can do it for relatively limited dollars. They can take that easement on a temporary basis. Arizona does exactly that. Arizona, with $1 million, has unlocked over 2 million acres of public lands. just by buying up a couple acre tracts of private land that get you onto that huge swath of public land. It's done very effectively. I mean, 2 million acres for $1 million. That's a pretty good deal, considering how much of it was landlocked previously.
So let me ask you this. So Sportsmen should embrace the Farm Bill, right? Sportsmen should embrace the Farm Bill. There's some provisions in here that are very valuable, as you've been mentioning, for access, for habitat, frankly, for building public-private partnerships between the landowner community and the sportsman's community. Landowners have relied upon the Farm Bill for several generations. Yet here we are. So we're recording this on November 26th. So here we are, November 26th. The current Farm Bill expired September 30th. We have, I think, 11 days left in the calendar year where Congress will be in session to get a Farm Bill approved. It seems generally there's bipartisan support for these programs under the Farm Bill, whether you're talking about nutrition programs or conservation programs. Yet here we are, we seem to be at a stalemate. What's going on?
We all know Congress can take everything to the last minute. They usually do. I was up there for 7 years, and that's what drives the day is deadlines. But yeah, the Farm Bill is in a tricky spot. For conservation, it's even a worse spot, just conservation in particular, because unlike the other programs, nutrition, the commodity support programs, conservation ended on September 30th. So if you're a landowner like Zane, or if you're a farmer out in Kansas, the programs you wanted to tap into, they became unavailable on September 30th. So we need a Farm Bill immediately. And yes, absolutely, sportsmen should care, because now if you're a landowner and you want to go to run voluntary public access or CRP, you can't do it because the programs aren't available now because we don't have a Farm Bill. They are close. And that's in terms of that, there's no measure to, but they are close. They're as close as they've ever been. I think the stakes are extremely high for conservation, so we hope to see them get it done. We've got a number of victories for conservation in the bills that are written. We just need them to put the two pieces together and pass them. No telling if they can do it. But if they don't, we're going to be in a world of hurt for conservation on private lands.
Well, so I want to talk about that, but I want to also talk about what at least the perceived hang-up is on getting a deal done right now. I mean, I know both the House and Senate have been negotiating a deal, trying to resolve some things. I understand there were some negotiations on the SNAP program that maybe there's some agreements on, but that could unwind a bit because now of some disagreements on forest management. That seems to be the new, so there's a forestry title to the Farm Bill, right? There's a forestry title, but it seems to me that there's an effort to insert a lot more into that forestry title than maybe has ever been there, and that's causing a major sticking point that could lead to the whole Farm Bill crumbling here at the 11th hour. Am I missing something?
No, you're exactly right. I mean, we all complain about Congress never getting anything done. That's because you're trying to get 535 folks basically to agree on a set of principles. And that's really tough. Right now they're disagreeing, you're right, on forestry. And I think this simple way to synthesize that is there's disagreement on how forests should be managed. Some folks are thinking that the government has too broad of authority to block some healthy forest management practices. And then some folks on the other side of that think if you get rid of those protections for forests, then there's long-term irreversible environmental impacts. I think you can easily see each side on those issues, but then that argument transcends forestry and goes right into nutrition. They're having huge problems in nutrition as to what work requirements you should meet before you're able to receive government assistance to basically eat meals every day. And in conservation, there's huge disagreements in conservation as well. They disagree on the size of the Conservation Reserve Program, for instance. They don't know how big to make that program because each million acres you increase it by costs a ton of cash. And cash is tight right now from Uncle Sam. So they're trying to figure those things out. And it's been really, really tough.
But it seems closer on the last two. I mean, I don't want I don't want to spend or belabor this point too much, but and we've talked about this on prior podcasts, forest management, and some of the problems that we've recognized across the West. That some of the catastrophic fires that we're seeing as potentially being at least forest management over the past 100+ years as a contributing factor to some of those extreme fire conditions. That aside, I mean, we've talked about that. We haven't talked about where the solutions are to that. But I'm not sure the solution to that is necessarily in the Farm Bill. I'm looking at that, and it seems to me you have these big fires in California that have come up, and those are being politicized right now in an effort to push some things into the Farm Bill that maybe otherwise would have been dealt with in different standalone bills, in different ways. That's just my outside perspective looking in on this, but it has the potential. I mean, we're talking about 11 working days, and actually, it's probably now 10 working days because I think we're approaching that time of the day out on the East Coast. 10 working days to deal with something that, in my mind, is more polarizing right now than the nutrition or the conservation pieces of the Farm Bill. There's general agreement on that those programs should exist. It's just how we fund them and what the qualifications are to receive funding and what level of funding. This, we're putting something in that there's a huge disagreement about whether we should do anything at all, which, man, that's like the proverbial turd in the punch bowl. For trying to get a Farm Bill passed.
I think I'd be curious to hear from Alex, just from the DC perspective, being in the soup, in the mix there, what we're hearing about the flashpoint associated with the wildfires and the issues that it's having for passage of a Farm Bill. Is that really an issue from your perspective that's penetrating into Congress, or is that just noise in the background around this issue that they're trying to push something in, and the real issue actually is the SNAP funding? Where does this really break down in Congress?
It's a good question. It's a mix of all of the above, and I think there's certain issues. There's an issue in almost every title being the different kind of columns of policy in the Farm Bill. So there's issues in the nutrition title. There's issues in the forestry title. There's also a lot of political calculus being made, I would suspect. We just had a major change in majority in the House of Representatives. There might be some folks thinking, not that I know of any of them, but there might be some folks thinking they would like to take a crack at writing this bill when they're in the majority next year. I think there's a number of calculuses being made, some related to policy, whether it's forest management or conservation or nutrition, but some also of a political calculus that who writes the bill next year when we get a shift in majority in a new Congress.
So use your crystal ball a little bit. I mean, you're working this issue daily. Get on the record here, prognosticate. Are we going to get something done by the end of the year?
It's shrinking every minute. It's shrinking every minute. We are incredibly positive, or optimistic, I should say. We're optimistic that we can get this thing done. But every minute that goes by where they don't come out and say we've struck an agreement on certain things, that's concerning to us. We're ratcheting up the pressure significantly on getting this thing done. We've been running an ad campaign online. We have a couple of action alerts going where folks can join in on the conversation and tell their members to pass a bill. Because if they don't, we get a number of budget cuts that kick in January. And the next Farm Bill, if it's in 2019 when we write this thing, it's a lot less dollars that we're working with for conservation, and that'll be a problem.
Yeah, Zane, what does this mean for you? I mean, if the Farm Bill doesn't pass this Congress, what does that mean for you?
Me and Alex talked about it a little bit the other day, just in a completely random conversation. But it's already started to. Being as they're, like Alex said, at the end of September, that's it. That's the end of the Farm Bill at this point. So they had even money that was allocated. What FSA and NRCS does, as I'm sure you know, is they too help with the cost share of the implementation of some of these practices. I had a farm, for instance, that was installed this year this spring with the full expectations of a large cost share to come this fall, and months came, went, no cost share. So I reached out to him, and come to find out that until there's a new farm bill, you're waiting. So what I told Alex was, I've been doing this for a number of years, and I have had really good experiences with all of it. But if somebody for the first time decided to pull their farm out of production and put it into one of these conservation practices and had an experience like what I had this fall, where they're withholding a large sum of money relative to the cost that I had to put up personally for the implementation of these practices, they're going to run like rats. I mean, nobody is going to want to be involved in this if this is a legitimate fear.
And are they going to come back? That's the question too. Will they come back if it's passed?
No, that's the good question. So that's, like Alex said, I mean, that's the importance of conservation and farm bill, and the importance of getting a rock solid, here we go, guys, everybody's comfortable, everybody's happy. And conservation is a large portion of this, because there's not too many guys that I know personally that would have weathered the financial withholding that we did. So.
Yeah, so people understand how that works. So if somebody thinks that, NRCS walks up to Zane with a checkbook and writes him a check so that then he goes out and does conservation, that's not how it works. How this works is a landowner out there on the ground is footing the bill to do that conservation, all of it, in the hopes that the USDA is going to come in then, and what they say, cost share, then he's going to show them the receipts, and they're going to pay for part of what he did. And so if you put a landowner in a really precarious situation when you say, hey, go put all this conservation on the ground, whether it's doing an easement that can be tens of millions of dollars in some cases out here in the West, or whether it is, just putting in a buffer strip, you're asking that guy to go to his bank, take out a loan or take out his checkbook and put tens of thousands of dollars on the ground with the expectation that we're going to pay him, that we're going to pay him back for that conservation work that he's done. So what happens if we can't write the check? What happens if USDA can't do that? That means Zane is sitting there with that money out of his pocket, unable to pay his bills.
Well, and it's like I said, that this is not a business that I'm involved in. This is driven by a passion for this stuff, for not only the hunting, but seeing how this stuff happens, the birth of the habitat growth followed by the regeneration of all these populations of, like I said, pheasants, quail, whatever it may be. And now you're at a point where, it's already not a lucrative thing. You're doing it for the passion, but now you have something like this happen to where there's not a lot of people that like I said, have that passion to where they're going to withstand something like that. So the importance of the Farm Bill is huge relative to moving forward with this stuff, because I've had a lot of fun doing it, a lot of fun with the implementation of this stuff. But at some point, you financially can't do it. It's not financially feasible to continue it.
But to be clear, we're not, I mean, you're doing it because you have this passion for it, and you have this passion for the wildlife and getting them back on the landscape, and you were saying you weren't really in it for the business side of it. There are a lot of people enrolled in Farm Bill programs that it's part of the business side of what they do. And so to me, as I'm hearing this discussion and I'm hearing what Nephi is saying and we're hearing what you're saying, Zane, I'm hearing if we don't pass a Farm Bill, there's some people that have been committed to this that can find themselves out of business.
For sure.
No.
I mean, these decisions in Washington, D.C.,
they affect real people.
They're affecting real people on the ground, lots of real people on the ground. And if those folks go out of business, if those programs go away, those access opportunities,
they go away.
Go away. That wildlife that's there because of the habitat improvements, they go away. I mean, this has a ripple effect. I don't think I'm overstating that.
Yeah, there needs to be integrity in the programs. And that's, when people are planning a conservation plan on a ranch or farm, that's not a 1-year deal. It's not they're not doing that as like, hey, I feel like doing this year. Might as well do it. I mean, they're looking sometimes decades, sometimes generations into the future in terms of when they plan how they're going to do those things. And if they don't, and they're looking for certainty, just like any business, they're looking for certainty in how they're going to do business. And, I think it's something that we should embrace as a country, that this idea that we have integrity in how we do business. We don't change our mind next year. We don't swing with the winds of politics on things that are really important. We stick with the right thing.
So, Alex, let me ask you a question. And I'm going to put on my doomsday hat here a little bit. If Congress doesn't...
Have you taken it off?
No, probably not. This has been pretty somber. If Congress cannot pass a farm bill and get it to the president's desk by the end of this Congress, what does that mean? I mean, what does that do to timelines to seeing a farm bill with funding in place, with conservation programs funded? What does that mean for these programs and the future of these programs? When could we expect at the earliest to see Congress come to some agreement and get a farm bill moved if they can't get it done by the end of this Congress?
Sure. So in your doomsday scenario, I'll try and be a little bit optimistic.
I like
here.
that. I like that.
Look, and we've seen this done in 2014, I believe. They failed to pass a bill on time, so they rolled into a new Congress, and then they produced a bill and passed it extremely quickly. I'd say if this doomsday scenario should happen, by the end of January or end of February at the latest, they could roll a bill out and have it to the president's desk. I think there's large agreement on all of this, and like we've talked about, and as the pressure builds, as we move into a new Congress, that pressure becomes pretty heavy on the backs of these members, and they need to get it done. And they can't delay forever. They've got to get it done. And I think after the new Congress is sworn in, they reach a point where it's not worth being an obstacle anymore. You just got to pass whatever is at your desk.
I was going to ask, just for clarification, in 2014, was there a flip of party in one of the chambers of Congress?
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
Yeah, no, so did Congress shift over? I mean, we've got a change in from the Republican-controlled House to the Democrat-controlled House, and there's going to be some shifting of, to all the various positions of leadership and in the committees and all those things. I mean, is that going to slow things up to get something done?
No, I don't think so. In terms of committee makeup, that'll largely stay the same. You'll have the same folks working on the same piece of legislation, just in different seniorities. In majorities, that could be interesting because, like we talked about, we had a new majority in the House. Democrats took over the House, meaning Democrats are now in charge on the House side, which they were not previously. I think politically it's kind of interesting because the Senate bill had historic bipartisan support. The most votes they've ever had in the Senate for a farm bill just happened on their version of the bill. And I think you see a lot of the House folks are in agreement with what the Senate wants. It's a pretty milquetoast bill by and large, but it's a bill that can get across the finish line and get there quickly. So I think should we get into next year, we see a bill look a lot more like the Senate version. And that's just because so many of the folks on the House side also agree with what the Senate did.
I like your optimism. Way to take that doomsday and turn it into an optimistic.
That's fair enough. And just to put a finer point on what you're saying is, sure, it's flipped, but that doesn't actually occur until early January. So for the time being and the 11 working days that we're talking about, it's still a Republican-controlled House, right?
And so let me ask you that with the last push you're doing here. So if listeners want to get involved and figure out how they can contribute and try and lend their hand to getting this across the finish line before the end of this calendar year, how can they do that?
I think first they need to keep listening to this great podcast, right?
There you go. Say that again and again and again. Yeah.
But honestly, this is a hard policy issue to talk about. It's not easy to relate to. So it's extremely helpful that folks are listening and paying attention to this stuff. After they do that, absolutely go to our website, trcp.org/farm bill. That's right into our action alert there you just punch in your information. It shoots off a letter to Congress saying, pass the bill now. And while you're at it, include these priorities for sportsmen. And those are priorities that have a very good likelihood of passing the finish line. We just need that little extra nudge from our sportsmen out there across the country. And you can also find that same action alert on any of our social media pages. We've been pumping it out pretty regularly on Instagram and Facebook, Twitter. Click on any of the posts we have there and it'll take you to the same thing.
What if somebody wants to do a little bit more, get a little bit more hands-on and personalized? Any suggestions there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, right now with members in DC, I would call the district office closest to you or the state office and weigh your concerns there. You can call the Washington, D.C. office and weigh your concerns there. And even if you can, just fire off a personalized email. They have oftentimes a contact form on their website. Something with a personal touch goes a long way. I used to work in those offices. I read 1,000 of those. The ones that's not cookie cutter, the ones that's personalized and sentimental and demonstrates why this matters to you is huge. That goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. From three guys who've had to respond to a lot of correspondence, that's key. Make sure that it's not, if I can do a search and see that 1,000 of them are exactly the same and one of them's different, I'm reading 2 letters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we got to get you back to fighting the good fight. But I do want to get a couple of things from you. One, anything that we missed that you want to touch on that you feel like listeners really should know about this about the Farm Bill.
No, I'll just beat the drum one more time. I mean, if there's anything to know and care about private lands conservation and the Farm Bill, it's that it's got a cool program called the Voluntary Public Access Program that as a Wyoming resident or anywhere else, you can go hunt whitetail on prime, habitat in Illinois. Maybe it's in Zane's backyard.
That's where it's going to be. I just want to make that clear.
Exactly. That's the coolest thing about it. No other place is stuff like this happening. It's in the Farm Bill.
I want to know, Zane, you have any thoughts on it as well?
No, I like Alex said, we're beating the drum one more time. But the voluntary access thing to me it's such a no-brainer for everybody to get on board with, because it's one of those things that probably doesn't. It's got a bad marketing guy in our state probably because people just don't know about it. I think that they would be kicking down the doors to be involved in this, to have a place to go that wasn't 10 tree stands within a 20-yard radius, to have your own little place to go for a set period of time and not have that pressure and have the ability to bring kids or first-time hunters up in this, and not have any kind of pressure to go at your own pace. I don't know how anybody could be opposed to something like that. But I just don't think that it gets I don't think it gets out there like it really needs to. And I think that it's important that everybody knows about it. I told Alex the other day that, I worked at a Shield sporting goods store here in Springfield for a number of years, and kids and parents would come up looking for their first bow or first shotgun or whatever it was. And maybe the parents have no idea how to get involved in this, no idea what avenue to even pursue this. My son or daughter wants to start deer hunting, and I have no idea where to begin, and I have no idea where to even take them or anything like that. This allows somebody that wasn't raised in this to get out and grow in the outdoors at their own pace.
I think that's a great perspective. And I appreciate you guys both coming on and sharing this. Zane, I got one more question I got to ask you, and then I have a question for both of you.
Yep.
In Illinois, how old do you have to be to hunt whitetail?
I don't believe there's a set age. It's a requirement that you take the hunter safety test here in Illinois, which is a series of field tests, climbing fences and stuff like that safely with firearms and stuff like that, as well as a written examination.
So I ask and I appreciate you saying that, because I've got a 10-year-old daughter who's passed her hunter safety course and is ready. She's not old enough to hunt big game in Wyoming yet, but I wonder if that would give me an additional opportunity to hunt on yours if I bring a youth hunter out there for the first time.
The answer is yes, I have one.
At least he's not selfish, right? At least he's not selfish.
It's funny because that's how they got me, to be honest with you. Hook, line, and sinker. That's how they got me involved in this voluntary access is. Letting people in is one thing, but promoting future generations in the outdoors and in the hunting and fishing, I've got a real soft spot for that, just as I'm sure you guys do. And that when they told me that they offer preference for first-time hunters, and there's nothing cooler than talking to the guys at IRAP in Illinois and getting to see some of those first-time harvest pictures, or getting to see the first-time fish that they catch, or whatever it may be. It's pretty darn cool. It's not something, I've been doing it for a long time, been hunting and fishing for a long time, and that kind of rejuvenates it in my eyes too, to see why you got started in all this, and to remember back to how incredible those first experiences were that drove this passion that has progressed.
I think it's amazing what you're doing there, and I agree with you on, as far as the value of having kids there, and giving them that first time opportunity. I also would say some of my greatest hunting experiences have been not just with youth, but with adults that have started hunting as adults and seeing them get their first animal. That is more rewarding than, I won't say any hunt I've ever been on, because that would be a lie. But it's been more rewarding than most hunts I've been on to see those first-time hunters, whether they're kids or adults, get out there into the field for the first time and experience what we've all been experiencing for so many years, right? I just think that's so cool.
I'm the exact same way. That's anymore. My dad's retired, and I would just as soon go out and sit with him and watch him harvest something that I have any interest in doing myself anymore. You hear guys talk about, I just soon film them or take pictures of them than even hunt anymore. And I'm the kind of guy that I just soon watch somebody else harvest the animal and get that excitement than me personally do it anymore.
I think that's cool, and I'm glad. Even though I don't live in Illinois, I thank you for creating those opportunities for our youth. So that's a big deal.
So a parting shot from me, because I think we're probably getting towards the end. Hey, Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, thank you so much. Alex, thank you for being on this show. Thank you for talking to us. My take home is a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. People don't care what you think till they think that you care. And I hope I got that right. But the reason I say that is because, sportsmen, go find some local farmers and ranchers and let them know that you care about them, being on the landscape, and that you want them to continue to be there, that you respect them, that you respect their property rights. As soon as farmers and ranchers, when they see that the sportsman's community, when they know that we are their advocates, they open those gates, and they are advocates for us too. So just remember that. People don't care what you think till they think that you care. And so, as we work together towards creating more opportunities for the sportsman's community and kind of building these bridges, make sure that we, that we create those alliances with the people that we need to be able to make these opportunities plentiful.
Mike, you got anything?
I got nothing.
Oh man,
what? I don't need to follow that.
No, that's true. That
perfect.
that was pretty good. But I'm going to follow it, not with anything of my own.
I'm not surprised.
Not of anything of my own. But I'm going to ask our guests one question that I ask everybody that joins us on this podcast, and so we call ourselves, it's the Your Mountain Podcast, and we're talking about the issues that impact your land and your water and your wildlife in those places that are so important to us. And so I want to ask each one of you, what's your mountain? What's that place that's so special and so important to you you don't have to give specific locations, but what's that place to you that means so much, that's so special?
Alex, you want to go ahead?
Don't all jumping up at once,
So relevant to this conversation, I guess my mountain would be, we've got a family lease that's been in the family since about 1960, I want to say. And it's on split use. It's about 400 acres of timber and a couple hundred acres of crops. We split it with a number of other hunters and fishermen. But one of the reasons it's so special, I've watched my dad, both my brothers take really nice whitetail. I learned how to squirrel hunt there, got my first experience hunting and fishing there. But also it's relevant to me now because we get to work with the landowner on conservation. We get to talk to him about like, hey, did you know there's some programs out there that can help you stem this giant water flow that's running off your field and carrying a lot of stuff with it. So especially then growing up and all the cool stuff I got to do because of it. But now that it relates to my professional life and the cool work we do here at TRCP, it's definitely special.
Thanks for sharing. If you're allowed to bring guests ever, you just let me know.
We'll see how good I sound on this podcast.
You're going to sound fantastic. I'm not using the podcast as just a way to get access to places to hunt.
No, definitely not.
No, don't want you
Except
to think
today.
that. Except today. It's
All right, Zane.
Zane.
No, I think similar in tying into all this too. I mean, the whole building the habitat is kind of a passion that was my dad's before me, and this was the CRP and the building of the habitat for everything was a passion of his and still is. And I was born and raised on the family farm that's a couple hundred acres, but when he bought it, it was a 200-acre cornfield, and you pull up the drive now and the house overlooks a big bluff, and there's not a corn kernel on the entire farm. The entire farm has been created with habitat in mind, and it's kind of cool to see. I was hounding him the other day, and I said, how did you not take any pictures of the cornfield before you started building all this? And he's like, son, I never thought about it. That wasn't high on the priority list at the time, but it's pretty incredible to think back to what it used to be relative to what it is now.
That's neat. Hey guys, really appreciate you both spending this much time with us today, talking about what I think is a really important topic, really important piece of federal legislation that everybody that's listening should be dialed in on and be following closely, and weigh in if you feel it appropriate, weigh in however you feel is appropriate. Wish you guys luck in all the work that you continue to do to support conservation, to support wildlife, and I'll leave it with this. Just everybody remember that life is about experiences, so go have one.